It's great to be here and to come up this way. So let's just jump right in. So let me quickly introduce what we do at the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication. We do two main things. Do I have a, oh, look at that. We do both research and outreach. I'm going to mostly talk about the work that we've been doing at the national level here in the United States. So we've done a whole long series of, now about 15 national scale survey studies to really try to understand the dimensions of how Americans respond to this issue. And let me just actually say that that's what we're really interested in. How do big or mass publics respond to this issue? What do they understand? What do they misunderstand about the causes, the consequences, the potential solutions to climate change? How do they perceive the risks? So the likelihood and the severity of different kinds of impacts. What kinds of policies do they support or oppose? And then what kinds of behaviors are people engaged in around the issues of climate and energy? And by behavior, we really look at four main types. How people actually use and conserve energy at home and on the road. Consumer behavior. So will people prefer products and services that are more environmentally friendly? But also to what extent are they willing to reward or punish companies for their behavior? So think about boycotts, or what have been called boycotts. That you prefer a certain company. We also look at social behavior, so things like how we communicate about this issue among our friends, our family, our coworkers. Social norms, these unwritten cultural rules that guide much of our daily lives. So I'll just quickly, by example, think about the shift that we've seen in this country around the social norms of smoking. When I grew up, smoking was cool. It was everywhere. We smoked on planes, people smoked in cars, we smoked in bars and restaurants, and so on. It was the norm. But that has clearly completely inverted in today's world, where smoking is now banned from all those places. And if I was to light up right here, most people would get really upset. Okay? So again, how these cultural norms shift dramatically. And then last but not least, we look at political behavior. To what extent are people willing to actually get engaged with the political system to demand broader systemic change? And then, of course, we're nerdy scientists, so our ultimate question then is why? What are the underlying psychological, cultural, political reasons why some people get really engaged with the issue of climate change, others are apathetic, and others are downright dismissive or hostile? So why? Why do we have such different responses to this issue? We work at many different scales, so here I'm mostly going to talk about the United States, but I'm happy when we get to Q&A to talk about these other scales, because we've done some of the first work ever in China and in India. With the Gallup World Poll, we looked at these issues across about 130 countries around the world. We've been doing a lot at the state and local level increasingly, including a long project I did with the Inuit Eskimo communities in the Arctic, who are frankly right on the front lines of this issue. They will be some of America's first climate refugees. So anyway, broad research agenda, but then we also have outreach, where we try to take some of the things that we learned and try to address some of the big questions and interests of the American public. And most particularly, about 6 months ago, we started a brand new national radio program called Climate Connections. And that really is, the emphasis is on the word connections. Taking this seemingly big, distant, abstract problem of climate change and connecting the dots between that and our daily lives, the things we care about. And in particular, hearing the voices of people who are observing the changes in their local environments, that are enduring and experiencing some of those impacts, but in particular, who are actually bringing many of the solutions to bear. I mean, there's so much great, incredible things happening across this country, and yet most of us had no idea. And we've done over 100 episodes so far, so I'm going to say they're 90 seconds long. 90 seconds. It's easy. You don't have to take a half an hour out of your day. It's 90 seconds. With a new episode every day. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We're in about 95 radio markets across the country, a few here in Connecticut, and it's growing by the week. So, and it's all available on our website, also downloadable through iTunes, and so on and so forth. So anyway, if you ever go to listen to any of those, you'll see how we try to at least take some of the things I'm going to talk about here and actually implement them in terms of content that people can actually engage in. All right. So, let's see, I think it is. Oh, not this I also should very quickly say that, of course, everything I'm going to talk about here is the product not just of myself and my team, but also our dear friends and colleagues, especially down at the George Mason University Center for Climate Communication, where a lot of our American work has been done in collaboration with, and of course our sponsors. Without these organizations and their support, we just literally couldn't do any of this. Okay, so let me start with a basic proposition. And that is that it would be great, it would be wonderful, if everyone in America could have the equivalent of Climate Change 101. Okay? So a full semester course dedicated to understanding here's how the climate system works, here's what the causes are, here's what the impacts are and going to be, here's what the solutions are. Okay? Maybe even graded. But that's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. Now, I'm not saying that in fact, there are millions of Americans who want to know more about this issue, who are keenly interested, who have lots of questions. And as a scientific community, it is our responsibility, frankly, it's our duty, to go more than halfway to meet them, to answer those questions, because they're legitimate and important questions. But that's not most people. Most people have not the background, they don't have the training, they don't have the interest, they don't have the time to get really deeply engaged in the details of what is a very complex issue. Okay. So the question I would like to raise for you is that given that fact, that most people have limited shelf space in their minds dedicated to this particular issue, because there are a lot of other issues out there too, what are the, say, 5 key things that most people should know about climate change? If that's all you've got space for, what would you want them to know? Do they really need to know all the details of how the carbon cycle works? Or how ocean currents work? Or what radiative forcing means? Or exactly how many parts per million of carbon dioxide are currently in the atmosphere? So based on our own work and the work of some of our colleagues, we think we've identified at least 5 core critical ideas that we think everyone needs to at least start with that will help people to understand the issue today, but also to help them make decisions for many decades to come, because we will be dealing with this for many decades to come. And we've actually boiled those 5 key ideas down to 10 words. Now, a dear friend of mine has actually converted this into a haiku, but I won't give you that. Okay, so first, it's real. It's happening. This isn't made up. This isn't a hoax. This is based on enormous amount of accumulated evidence over many, many decades of work. This is real. Secondly, it's us. To extend upon that a little bit, of course the climate has changed naturally many, 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 many times over the past millions and even billions of years. Yes, of course. But this time is different. This time it's the direct result of human activities, most notably the burning of fossil fuels, though there's also some important land use change and deforestation and things like that. Third, it's bad. It's bad now, and it's going to get much, much worse if we continue on the current path. Fourth, critically, that scientists agree. The people who study this issue day in, day out, for their living, have concluded, based upon an enormous accumulation of evidence, that human-caused global warming is happening. These key facts. There is plenty of debate within the scientific community over exactly what impacts are going to occur in what place, at what time, 50 years from now. That's uncertain. But the basic facts about climate change, that is happening, that is mostly human-caused, and that it's going to have all kinds of negative consequences, there is no serious discussion or debate about that. And yet, I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. But last, but absolutely not least, is that there's hope. There are, in fact, many, many solutions already in hand. It isn't going to require some breakthrough like somebody invents cold fusion to solve this issue. We have the ability, right here, right now, to address this. What we're lacking is the public and political will to actually implement these changes. We'll come back to that. Okay, So, given that these are at least 5 core critical ideas, how are we doing here in the United States? So what I'm showing you now is data from a whole series of national scale survey studies that we conducted in the United States over the past, well now, 6, 7 years. I'm happy to talk about how we conduct these studies and so on if anyone's interested, but I don't want to make you go to sleep after having waited for me for a while. So anyway, happy to answer those questions if anyone wants them. But these are all national representative survey studies. And what you see is that as of our last study, which was last October, 66% of Americans said, yes, global warming is happening. But I want you to also note this key pattern right here, that back in 2008, 71% of Americans said that. But then we saw a big 14 percentage point drop in public belief that it's even real. And by the way, ours isn't the only data that shows this. Everyone else, like Pew, Gallup, et cetera, that tracked these questions over time, saw this same exact pattern in that critical time period. You're going to see this little thing again and again. Okay, so 2/3 of Americans say that global warming is happening. But only 50%, as of a few months ago, say that it's mostly human caused. So clearly there's still a fair amount of confusion out there on one of the core basic facts. And in fact, it's even interesting to see what's going on in Congress right now, because just a few weeks ago, the Senate took a series of votes about the reality of climate change. And 98 senators, all but one, I believe, now said, and are on the record as saying that they believe climate change is real. But when asked, do you think it's human caused, the numbers dropped to about 50%. So we still have a big discrepancy between what the science is telling us and what certainly the public and the politicians are doing as well. Okay. But only 1 in 10 Americans understands that the number or the proportion of scientists that have concluded those basic core facts, it's happening and it's human caused. Only 1 in 10 understands that it's in the neighborhood of 90 to 100%. There have been numerous studies of the scientific community by actually doing surveys of them, by looking at the actual peer-reviewed literature, content analyzing, and seeing what claims they make in their peer-reviewed papers, and so on. And all of them seem to congregate right around 95 to 97% of climate experts have agreed with these core basic facts. But only 1 in 10 Americans understands this. There is mass confusion. This is consequential. We actually just published today, this afternoon, a paper where we've identified this as what we call a gateway belief. The more people understand that the experts agree, the more they in turn say, oh, well, then I think it's real. And I think it's human caused. And I think it's a serious problem. And moreover, I'm more likely to support policy action and to even be willing to take individual action. And it makes perfect sense from an individual layperson's perspective. If your perception is that the experts are still arguing with each other over whether the problem even exists, then most people say, okay, I'm going to take a wait-and-see attitude. Scientists, you go off into a room, you argue it out, you'll work it out, right? And then when you figure it out, you'll tell me. Okay? Not realizing, of course, that scientists did that decades ago. Now, there are a couple major reasons why. One is it's partly the scientific community's fault. We're lousy communicators. Or at least we have that. And much more could be said about that. But the other is that this isn't an accident. This is the direct result of a very massive, well-funded disinformation campaign. Okay. There has a very well-documented campaign by particularly fossil fuel interests over many decades now to basically fool the public. And this is actually a strategy that was literally lifted, chapter and verse, right out of the tobacco wars. Remember the tobacco wars? No, of course you don't remember this. Sort of the older people like me in here. I mean, the Surgeon General said in the United States that tobacco was harmful to human health back in the 50s. And the tobacco companies were really worried about that because they knew that if people really took that seriously, they'd stop smoking, as we eventually mostly did. So what they decided their key strategy was not to claim that smoking is beneficial for you, though some continue to do that. It's funny, you go back and look at some of those old advertisements, they actually said smoking cigarettes was good for you, longer life, etc. Instead, they said, doubt is our product. As long as we can continue to convince Americans that it's not yet clear, it's still uncertain in terms of whether smoking is bad for you, we will continue to prosper. And they did for decades, raking in literally billions and billions of dollars. That exact same strategy, and including some of the exact same scientists who at the time were saying that smoking is not bad for you, are the exact same people who are now arguing that climate change is not a problem. Next month, a new movie is about to come out called Merchants of Doubt, which takes a book written by Harvard historian Naomi Oreskes, who really just details this whole set of the buying of a few contrarian scientists by the fossil fuel industry to basically make these claims and to confuse the public. It documents this so powerfully. I highly encourage you to see it, because you will see exactly how the strategy worked. And it continues to work. So this is a highly consequential misunderstanding. We also see that most Americans aren't really that worried about this issue. As of last October, only 11% of Americans said that they were very worried about this. Now, there's a variety of reasons for that, but one of the most consistent is something that we've found over and over again in all the years we've been studying this, and that is that for many people, climate change is a distant problem. Distant in time, that people think the impacts won't be felt for a generation or more, and distant in space. This is a problem for polar bears, or maybe some developing countries, but not the United States, not Connecticut, not Waterbury, not my friends and family, or any of the people in places that I care about. So as a result, it's psychologically distant. It's one of these issues that even if you accept that it's real, many people just say, it's out there, we'll get to that someday. But in the meantime, we've got much higher priority issues that we need to deal with. And that's exactly what we see when we look at the list of national priorities. I'm sure many of you have seen this before. This data comes from the Pew Research Center. Our own shows exactly the same pattern. That whenever you ask people, what are the top priorities for the President and Congress? Global warming, climate change, almost always at the bottom. And in fact, since 2007, that critical period I was talking about, that high water mark, it's dropped 9 percentage points. Okay. Now we have one other way of really getting at this, and it's one of my all-time favorite techniques and tools. And since I have a completely non-representative sample of the American public here, we're going to play along. Okay? It's a very simple question, and it's a form of free association. So here's the question that we asked the American public in all of these studies. What's the first thought or image that comes to your mind when you hear the words global warming? I don't say anything. Okay. Now, just out of curiosity, how many people had something come to their mind about, say, melting ice? Sea ice retreating, ice bergs, up high, where we go, look around. Okay, look at that. Okay, I'm psychic.
Psychic.
I'm also a scientist that asks that question. And what do we find over and over? That's one of the first things that many people think of. Okay? And why is that? Because we live in a media-saturated world. We don't see climate change directly. It gets mediated for us. It gets reported through the media. And think about it. You've just written a story about global warming, and you hand it in to your editor, and your editor says, okay, somebody down in photography, give me an image of global warming. What do they always go to? A picture of melting ice, or maybe a picture of a polar bear. Okay? You're watching the nightly news, and they're doing a story about global warming. What do you almost always see? A picture of a melting glacier. Or even better, a calving glacier, with a big chunk of ice coming off and a big splash. I mean, it's good television, right? Okay. So we see these everywhere. They become part of the iconography of global warming. And in one way, this is good, because it resonates with an intuitive mental model that we all understand perfectly. Okay? If I take a glass of ice outside on a warm summer day, what happens? It melts. I didn't have to show you a graph. I didn't have to explain physics. You know. I don't have to explain to you at all what happens. And so when you show people pictures of melting ice happening all over the world, like especially those before and after pictures of glaciers melting around the world, which are really powerful, people go, oh, yeah, gosh, that makes sense. The world's warming up. But there's a downside to this particular icon, too. Now, everybody who was just thinking of melting ice, can you put your hands back up? Okay, now keep them up if you live on the shores of the Arctic Ocean, in Antarctica, or next to a melting glacier. Oh, we got a big room. There's not one person here that lives on the shore of the Arctic Ocean? Yeah. It reinforces the sense that this is distant. This is something happening at the poles. This is something happening at high altitude. Okay? Not where we live. The vast majority of us will never go to the North Pole or to Antarctica, or even probably see a glacier in real life. Though I must tell you, they are awesome to behold. Okay? Moreover, most of those pictures of melting ice that you see, there are no people. It's just melting ice. And it's kind of hard to get really emotionally engaged with a chunk of melting ice. Okay? And what people don't get is why that really matters. Okay, so ice is melting. So what? Well, a lot of people don't understand that part of why we care about melting ice, because when ice melts, especially land ice, is that it increases sea levels. And sea levels end up right here in Connecticut, in New England, which actually has had some just amazingly large 4 inches in the past couple decades. Some really unusual events, which increases coastal erosion and flooding and storm impacts during things like Hurricane Sandy and so forth. So people haven't connected those dots. And what they really haven't connected with are some of the ones that we in the scientific community are most concerned about. That warming is causing massive melting of things like the Arctic ice sheet over the Arctic Ocean, which exposes the ocean beneath to the sun's rays, which further warms the ocean, which melts more ice, which causes more warming, which causes more melting, which causes more warming, which causes more melting in a runaway death spiral. And that's hugely important because what happens in the Arctic has global consequences for all of our weather and future climate. Okay? It's a feedback loop that's critically important. Okay? Most people don't understand. That's why we care. It's not just about polar bears. Okay. Then other people who think of just rising temperatures, a variety of people who continue to think that global warming and the ozone hole are the same thing. It's a longer story to be told there, but they are not. Let me just say, there is global warming over here, there is ozone hole over here. They are different issues. Okay? You cannot get skin cancer from global warming. Okay? People who have alarmist images, and these are like apocalyptic images. They often go way beyond the worst case of scientific scenarios, like death of the planet, or like after nuclear war. Okay, now, climate change is a serious problem, but it's not going to cause death of the planet. I'm not worried about the planet. The planet's going to be fine. I'm worried about us, and I'm worried about many of the other species we ride on this rock with. But I'm not worried about death of the planet. Flooding and sea level rise, changes in the climate system, impact on non-human nature, not people. And then last but not least, naysayers. And there are different species of naysayers. There are those who just simply deny it. It's just not happening. Then there are those that say that they doubt, they just don't think it's been proven yet. So they're kind of engaging with evidence, maybe just cherry-picked evidence, but they are trying to argue at least on that level. They just say, I haven't been convinced. Then there are those that doubt based on their own personal experience. It was -5 here in Connecticut the other day, so how could it possibly be? How could global warming be true? There is a reason we call it global warming. Believe it or not, actually, the United States just went through its warmest January ever. Yeah, that's right. The United States just had its warmest January ever. Not New England, but the United States. There's a horrible drought going on across the entire western side of the continent right now. Anyway, then those that blame it on media or environmentalist hype, and then last, those that we lovingly call the conspiracy theorists, who say it's a hoax, it's scientists making up data, it's a UN plot to take away American sovereignty, it's a scheme by Al Gore and his friends to get rich, and many, many, many other such stories. Okay? All right. By the way, this data is from 2003. I'll show you more recent data in just a moment. But one last point I want to make about this is that one of the most important things that we find is what we don't find. In all the years we've asked this, nobody associates global warming with impacts on human health. Nobody thinks about infectious diseases. Nobody thinks about allergies. Nobody thinks about asthma. Nobody gives us anything about the impacts of extreme weather events, which kill people, like heat waves or extreme storms. No, because again, many people think that the impacts are primarily on, for instance, non-human nature, not us. And yet it's us that's really what's at most at risk. It's people, not polar bears and penguins. Okay, so like I said, this was from 2003. Here's where we were using this exact same measure in 2010, at the bottom of that decline. Now, as you may notice, there is one big shift. And that's in these naysayer images. And about half of those now are those conspiracy type associations. So why these declines? Well, we think there are a lot of things going on, but in some ways it was a perfect storm. First, the economy, duh. And 2008 is when the housing bubble pops, when the financial crisis hits, unemployment surges over 10%, and jobs in the economy soar to the top of national priorities lists where they have dominated everything ever since. That's easy to understand. If you're afraid of losing your job, or your mortgage is underwater, or someone you know is about to lose their home, that's not very hard to understand why we got so concerned about that and put a lot of other things, not just climate change, a lot of other things to the side. Okay, but what people don't also recognize is there was a massive decline in media coverage. Newspaper coverage, tracked by my friend Max Boykoff, dropped by 2/3. Just mentioning climate change in stories. Nightly network news coverage, Bob Rule tracks that, dropped by 90%. Okay, and it's not like it was getting a lot of attention even back in the good old days of 2007, 2008. We've done our own media analysis, and in 2007, the high water mark, climate change was mentioned in 0.9% of total news coverage on television, radio, magazines, cable news, etc. And by 2011, it had dropped to 0.1%. So we don't see it very often in the media. In fact, we rarely see it in the media. And that's really important because, look, we can all look out a window, and there is CO2 pouring out of tailpipes, it's pouring out of buildings, it's pouring out of smokestacks. There's CO2 coming out of your mouth and nose this very second. But until I said it, you weren't conscious of it because it's invisible. You see that? No, of course not. If carbon dioxide was black, we would have solved this a long time ago. But we can't see it. Okay? I mean, and I asked, just use your imagination the next time you go outside on a nice sunny day, and just take a moment to look around on the street. Daily life, blue sky, sunshine, and yet if you just think about it with your imagination, you're standing in a volcano of CO2 that is pouring out of this campus, out of Waterbury, out of New Haven, out of New York and Boston and Miami and Denver and LA and Beijing and Johannesburg and so on and so forth. Actually, let me just take a moment because finally someone has come up with a way to try to visualize this, and if I can get it to work, I want to just quickly try to show it to you. This is NASA's efforts to basically show us, at least from a large-scale level, what that actually looks like. This is CO2, modeled as CO2, coming out of the northern hemisphere. And you can see down here, this is in January. We just flipped to February of 2006. And you can see just massive pulses of CO2 coming out of the northern hemisphere as we head into the summer months. And when CO2 goes up in the atmosphere, it very quickly dissipates around the entire world. You know, it's one of the fascinating things. When you breathe out, those molecules of CO2 that you just breathed out very quickly get dispersed around the entire world. I think it's about 2 weeks for your CO2 that you breathed out just now to make it all the way around the world. That's how tightly bound together we in fact are. By the way, the CO2 that we breathe out is not a significant contribution to climate change. So keep breathing. No, it's the burning of our fossil fuels primarily, which is going on here in the northern hemisphere that you can see right now, that is generating these massive plumes of CO2. But as we move into the summer months, you're going to start seeing much more happening down here in Central and South America, and in particular in Africa, where it becomes fire season. Especially here in Africa, these are human-set fires in most cases. People clearing land for agriculture. Okay? So anyway, you get the point. It's also beautiful in an interesting way. Okay. All right. We also had some unusually cold weather in that time period. One was snowmageddon and snowpocalypse, and now we're into who knows what. So now we're on a polar vortex and other terms. I already talked about this. ClimateGate happened, some stolen emails that were twisted out of context to imply the scientists were making it all up. Of course, there were 6 different investigations of that, finding absolutely no wrongdoing whatsoever, but nobody knows that, because the damage has already been done. And then last but not least is political polarization. This issue, climate change, has become the most polarized issue in America, where Democrats and Republicans are the farthest apart. Climate change, not immigration, not gay marriage, not health care. Climate change has become the most widely polarized. And that wasn't always the case. In 1997, Democrats and Republicans basically had the same view. And then Clinton and Gore signed the Kyoto Protocol, which was an attempt to try to rein in global emissions. And ever since that moment, the two parties have gotten farther and farther and farther and farther and farther and farther apart. Though there have been many moments, such as, for instance, the Republican nominee for president in 2008, just a few years ago, John McCain, conservative from Arizona, was for years the sole pioneering champion of climate legislation in the U.S. Senate. Republican. But because of the way and the dysfunctionality of our politics, we have now gotten into a place where people say, oh, that's just a liberal issue. I can't believe that. I can't believe the science because that's just Al Gore and liberals, and I don't trust them, I don't like them, I don't like their values, so therefore I think anything that they're for, I'm against. That happens all too often. Okay. So why the rebound since then? Well, in one part, the U.S. economy and employment are improving. There has been increased media coverage, and in large part that's been because this country has been going through some extreme weather. Year after year with all-time record-setting events, of which we've had our own share right here in Connecticut. And we know that many Americans are now beginning to think, hey, maybe something is going on. Maybe climate change has something to do with this. So we already know that about 57% of Americans say that global warming is already affecting weather in the U.S., and about half of the country think it's even affecting specific events, like at the time the drought that was going on in the Midwest and the Great Plains, Superstorm Sandy. Now, it's not simple. It's not like you just simply experience a storm or a drought and then everybody suddenly goes, got it. Okay, global warming, real, serious, we need to take action. No. We're humans. We're way too complicated for that. We know that people who are deeply committed to the idea that global warming is real will, there's a psychological principle called motivated reasoning. That when you deeply believe something, emotionally believe something, it's rooted in your values, you are prone to what's called motivated reasoning, to look for evidence that basically validates what you already believe. Okay? And you see that on the people who really are worried about climate change sometimes, where they will attribute events to global warming that really shouldn't be attributed to global warming. Like they see a tornado, a terrible tornado that takes apart like Joplin, Missouri a few years ago. Terrible tragedy. there were some who looked at that and said, aha, look, there's global warming. Actually, no. There's no known scientific link between climate change and those kinds of events, at least not yet. But on the flip side, those people who are firmly convinced that climate change is a big hoax, they're prone to ignoring a lot of evidence that shows that it is, and they're even able to warp their own perception of what they've actually experienced. We actually found in our own research that people who experience heat waves, if they are firmly convinced climate change is a hoax, will actually say, no, I didn't experience a heat wave. And yet you compare their perceptions against their actual weather measurements. They say, no, the world's not warming, and I haven't seen any warming because of climate change is a hoax. So human beings are funny this way. However, most people are not deeply committed to these kinds of views. Most people are somewhere in the middle. And we know that a lot of people will draw on personal experience to make up their mind. So when it's -5 out the window, they go, well, gosh, it doesn't seem like global warming. So maybe it's not real. But on the same side, when it's a heat wave, they go, well, gosh, that does seem like global warming. So maybe it is real. Okay? Neither time is an appropriate use of your own personal experience to make a judgment about what's going on globally. Okay. We also know in our work that there is no single public, that in fact there are multiple publics. And what we've identified is what we call global warming 6 Americas. Let me quickly introduce them to you. First is a group we call the Alarmed. That's 13% of Americans. These are people who are firmly convinced it's happening, human caused, serious, and urgent, and they strongly support action. Then a group we call the Concerned. These are people who think it's happening, human caused, and serious, but they tend to think of it as distant. Again, distant in time, distant in space. So yeah, I wish somebody would do something about it, but it's not a high priority. It's something we can kind of put on the back burner, not realizing that the pot's actually boiling over on the back burner. Then a group we call the Cautious, and they're still on the fence. Is it real? Is it not? Is it human? Is it natural? Is it serious? Is it kind of overhyped? Paying attention, but really haven't made up their mind. Then a group we call the Disengaged. Heard of global warming, but I don't know anything about it. I don't know what causes it, I don't know what the consequences are, I don't know what the solutions are. Basic awareness is their primary barrier. Then a group we call the Doubtful, who say, it's probably not real. But if it is, it's natural. Nothing humans have anything to do with, nothing we can do anything about. So I don't think about it very much, and I certainly don't see it as much of a threat. And then last but not least are those that we call the Dismissive. Firmly convinced it's not happening, it's not human caused, not serious, and again, most of them are conspiracy theories. So this gives you a clear sense that there are very different audiences in the United States. And one of the first rules of effective communication, of effective education, of effective good relations with your own family and friends is know your audience. Who are they? What do they know? What do they believe? What do they value? What emotions do they have? Who do they trust? Where do they get their news and information from? Because if you don't know that and you try to communicate, especially with a stranger that you don't already know quite well, most times it's like playing darts in a crowded bar with the lights off and a blindfold on. Okay? You might hit the target on occasion just by chance, but most times you're going to miss. And too often you're actually going to hit somebody and they're going to come after you. Okay? You're going to have a backlash effect. And that has happened over and over again, in particular on this issue, where people have communicated in ways that worked for them. I care passionately about the polar bears. I'm telling you, look at what we're doing to the polar bears. It's not fair what we're doing to the polar bears. To somebody who's like, I don't care about polar bears. Or somebody else that says, you know what? I really don't care about polar bears because a polar bear would eat me if it had the chance. Screw the polar bears. So the point is, you need to know who it is you're communicating with and find a way that meets them where they are, not where you are. And just to underscore the point that there are completely different conversations happening in this country at the same time, we've asked people, if you could ask an expert on global warming one question, what would you ask? These groups down here, they want to know, so how do you even know that this is happening or human caused? And on a deeper level, they're really asking, why should I trust you? Whereas these groups are saying, okay, maybe it's real, but so what? Why should I care? What's it got to do with me? or anything I care about. Whereas these groups are like, okay, I got it. It's happening. It's human cause serious. What do we do? What do we do? And I think as a community, we've actually done a far better job communicating to these folks the problem than we have the solutions. Because they don't know, and they're constantly asking us, what can I do? What can we do to actually address this? And that has left a hope gap. Where people, at least some people are actually now very worried about this issue, but they feel like we can't do anything. And when you're in that situation, that's a scary place to be. In fact, we're even beginning to hear some of these people say, is it too late? Are we doomed? That's a dangerous attitude. Because to quote Henry Ford, those who think they can and those who think they can't are both right. Okay. One last thing to point out is that's the role of values. Values turn out to be one of the primary reasons why different types of people engage with this issue the way they do. So what we have found is that people who are at this end of the spectrum tend to have what we call strong egalitarian values. They tell us that they care deeply about discrimination in society, that government should be taking action to eradicate poverty, that there's vast inequities of wealth both within this country and across the world, and that if we could get rid of those inequities, there would be less conflict in the world, and many other such views. All of which have little or nothing to do with climate change directly, and yet people with that particular value system are the ones who care the most about climate change, because they often see it as an issue of enormous injustice and unfairness. That we, the people who got all the benefits of burning fossil fuels, are not the same people or species that are going to take the brunt of what's already happening, much less what's going to happen. And that's highly motivating for them. But by contrast, the people down here tend to have what we call highly individualistic value systems. It's about individual liberty, individual freedom, individual autonomy that's often framed as anti-government. The government is too big, it's too intrusive, it's the nanny state, they're telling us what to do, there's too much taxation, too much regulation, etc. You know all these things, right? This is, in popular terms, what we often hear out of the Tea Party, out of the libertarian movement, and so on. That individual liberty trumps all other values. Those people are the most hostile to the issue of climate change. Why? Because they're afraid of climate change. Not in the way that the alarmed are afraid. The alarmed are afraid of the impacts. They don't even believe it's real. What are they afraid of? They're afraid of the solution. Because climate change is the ultimate collective action problem. There's no way that each of us, through good, virtuous, individual activities, changing our light bulbs, insulating our home, buying a more fuel-efficient car, changing the kinds of things that we buy, can solve this problem. Now, I'm not saying that it's not incredibly important to do all those things. It is. If Americans did just common sense things that would actually benefit all of our bottom line, collectively we could reduce U.S. emissions by about 10%. And that's a real contribution. That's a significant contribution. But it's only 10%. The rest is going to really require policy. Government. By localities, by states, by the nation, and yes, the world, because the United States doesn't exist by itself. It is going to take international cooperation, and dare I say that may mean the United Nations, which for some people immediately evokes images of black helicopters. And so when they hear the word global warming, they immediately think, oh my God, it's just a liberal excuse to grow the size of government, to have more intrusion in our lives, to tell us what we can and cannot do. And so climate change has become a front in a much bigger struggle, an American struggle, over what is the proper role of government in a society of free people. It's one of the oldest questions of this republic. It goes all the way back to the founders and before. And we're still struggling. Climate change is just one place where we continue to fight over. Healthcare has been a way bigger fight in recent years over that same basic question. Okay, so that's why they hugely diverge when it comes to policies like regulating carbon dioxide as a pollutant. What's the government telling business what it can and cannot do? The alarmed? Great, love it. Dismissive? I hate it. Requiring that utilities produce at least 20% of their electricity from clean energy sources. Alarmed? Love it. Dismissive? Hate that. Government telling us what we can and cannot do. However, then there are policies like clean energy research that everybody supports. Or government help for buying fuel-efficient vehicles or putting solar panels on the roof. Everybody likes that. Now, why? Okay, so the best way to tell this is to actually just tell you a story. This is a real story. It happened just about a year ago. In the state of Georgia, there's a state monopoly called Georgia Power that produces all the electricity and distributes all the electricity in the state. It's good business. It's always nice to have a monopoly. And they did not want competition from rooftop solar. They didn't want individuals putting solar panels on their roof and generating their own electricity and then selling that electricity back to the grid, because that's competition. So the Sierra Club partnered with the Atlanta Tea Party. Let me say that again. The Sierra Club partnered with the Tea Party to fight that monopoly power, and they beat them twice. So now a homeowner in Georgia can decide to install solar panels on their roof and generate their own electricity and sell that electricity back into the grid. Now, why did they do that? Sierra Club? Pretty obvious. They care about climate change. But the Tea Party doesn't believe in climate change. So why did they do it? Because for them, it was about individual liberty and consumer choice and self-reliance. I want to have my control over my own energy destiny. And as somebody here in New England who has lost power for as much as 10 days because of Hurricane Irene, and then Sandy, and then Nemo, which is nothing compared to the, my neighbors who had their homes washed away. But nonetheless, 10 days without power sucks. I don't like that one bit. I want my own power. I don't like being dependent on a big company that doesn't frankly care so much about me. Self-reliance. That's like one of the preeminent New England values, right? I mean, didn't we have a famous author in this neighborhood that wrote a whole book, an essay about self-reliance? Emerson? So the point is that at times, and this is the art of politics, there are policies that completely different folks will come to support for their own reasons. There's this wonderful old phrase from Christianity that said, there are many roads to Damascus. Okay? And sometimes completely different types of people can come to support the exact same policy for completely different reasons. Okay? And that's the power of, in many cases, the American system. Okay. So as I talked about, we saw a major shift from 2008 to 2010, and it radically changed the national political climate of climate change. However, we are beginning to see that Americans are beginning to connect the dots between climate change and the other things that we care about. That there are, in fact, very different audiences here in the U.S. that each need a tailored engagement strategy. But crucially, the facts are always interpreted by these audiences. They don't just accept them. It's also true in the classroom. Students interpret what they are learning because they're trying to make it see how this new information fits with their current understanding about what they know or think they know, their underlying values, and their feelings. We haven't talked a lot here about emotion, but this issue does generate a lot of important emotions. So knowledge is necessary, but it's insufficient. There are a lot of other factors that are also coming to play in shaping this, including some of these broader national forces like the economy and politics. But that it is important that people at least understand that the experts have in fact agreed a long time ago about the reality and seriousness of this problem. That it is connected to our lives. It's not far away in time and space, especially our health. And most importantly, that it is in fact solvable. That there is many, many things that we can do. And with that, you can find all of our research. We make it available on our website. I encourage you to come visit anytime, as well as come check us out at Climate Commission. Thank you.